Right, let's get into this. You heard Peter pray just now about the name that we're going to be focusing on today. It is Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is my peace. Comes out of the book of Judges. It's the first time it is mentioned in the scriptures in a story that involves a phenomenal character. His name is Gideon. And Gideon is going to teach us so much today about what peace really is. We're doing this as a journey, and I see a few new faces here today, and so I need to just explain that we're convinced that God reveals himself progressively through human history, and that over the course of time, whenever God revealed himself, certainly in the Old Testament, he was given a new name. It was the same God, just a different revelation of who that God was, and every time he revealed himself in a different way, the people would give to him a very significant and special name. And so over the course of human history, God has continually revealed himself. The final revelation of God was seen in Jesus. There will not be another revelation of God other than the revelation of what God will do in the future. But Jesus is God's final revelation to us. But between creation and Jesus, there were a number of other revelations of God seen by the names that he has been given. So it's kind of progressive by name. Our theme verse is very simply Psalm 9 verse 10, which says, "Those who know your name will trust you." If you're not trusting God as you should, you may need to know him better by his name. You need to know the implications and the applications of every name of God. Same God, just a different name. And so today we turn to Judges chapter 6. I want to read to you a portion there, and then what we're going to do is it's quite a long story of Gideon, but there's so much that we can learn. So what we plan to do is I'm going to read a passage, stop and explain it, then read another passage, and we'll just see how far we can get through the story in the time that I have. But let's start the story in Judges chapter 6. I want to read to you from verse 11 through to verse 24. It will come up on the screen if you'd like to follow it there. Just let me set the scene. The nation of Israel is once again in a bad place. The Midianites surround them. The Midianites hound them. The Midianites have beaten them up and chased them up into the hills. And so the nation of Israel is completely dysfunctional. They are all over the place. There's no leader. There's no unity. There's not a lot going for this nation. And so as they're hiding up there in the hills, the Midianites are plundering everything that Israel has. They're eating their corn. They've taken away their homes. They raided their crops. And so the poor young Israelites, or the nation of Israel, are up there in a very bad place. Then one night, this is what happened. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak of Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But sir, Gideon replied, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our father told us about? When he said, 'Did you not know that the Lord brought you out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hands of Midian.' The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?' But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went in, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and he offered them to him under the oak. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place it on this rock, and pour out the broth." As Gideon did so with the tip of the staff that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire fled from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Ah, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You're not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it stands in Ophrah in the Abiezrites. Father, we want to pray that this short explanation of the story of Gideon would maybe do something in our own lives today. That maybe those who are looking for peace and looking for peace in the stupidest of places may find that the fruitlessness of their journey to find peace can only really end when we find you to be our peace. That's the purpose of what I would preach today, and pray that you would fulfill it in your most beautiful and sovereign way. And we ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen. There are a number of cliches that we have used when we come to talk about peace. And one of the cliches is simply this, that I've said to you many times before: you can't have the peace of God without having peace with God. You see, you can't have the peace of God and claim, "I want to have the peace of God for every situation in my life, every trial, every trauma, every situation. I want His peace." Well, let me tell you at the outset, people, you will never have the peace of God until you have peace with God. I just love the two testimonies of the Harrell boys today. They've declared peace with God. As young as they have, they've come to realize that Jesus, when He came and He died upon the cross, He signed the peace contract with us with His own blood. And He's done His portion. And the rest is now up to us. And we have to pick up that peace. We have to acknowledge what He has done. And we have to sign the agreement, as it were, that the peace with God is now between the two of us. It's not just something that is over there. It is something that exists between me and Him. I would like today to presume, it's a vast presumption, that this is true of you. Because this is not our subject today. Because I want to talk about the peace of God, presuming today that you already have peace with God. People, if you do not have peace with God, please don't leave this place until you do. This is a great place for you to talk to somebody. There will be people in the room at the back there ready to counsel, ready to share, ready to pray with you. Do not leave this place until you at least have peace with God. Because there is no peace of God until you have peace with God. So my prayer for you today is that each one of us will, now my presumption today is that you have got that. If you haven't, you need to get it. But it's the peace of God that I want to talk about. How is it that people like Job evidence the peace of God? I know he had peace with God because God had declared him to be righteous. That's what the peace of God does for you. But when you have the peace of God upon you, you can go through anything. You won't go through much more than Job went through. Losing his family, losing his business, losing his wealth, losing his identity, losing his credibility in the community, losing his health, sitting on an ash heap, scraping himself with pots, broken pots to get rid of the boil. You won't lose much more than Job ever lost. And yet Job evidenced for us not just peace with God, but the wonder and the incredible beauty of the peace of God. It's this peace of God that I want. And I think I know where to find it and how to get it. So listen carefully. But it all begins at the point of the problem. You see, there's a problem. And many counseling offices today are full of people looking for peace. Many churches are filled with people looking for the peace of God, and they're searching to find it. Sadly, as I said just now, many of them will look in the stupidest of places. Some will look to find it in a substance. Some will find it in a relationship. Some will try and find it in counseling. And there's nothing wrong with counseling, but if that's all you have, then that's all you have. So there is something more that we need to find in order for us to be able to find the peace of God. It's the most sought after commodity in the entire world today. But here's the truth. there are two areas of conflict where the war exists. Let me draw for you a circle here. This is the circle of your mind. They say if you could draw a perfect circle, that you're a bit loony, so it's not quite perfect, but that doesn't mean I'm not loony. But here's the deal. You know, there are two sources of conflict. The first source of conflict is a conflict that comes from without. This is you. This is a picture of your mind, and your heart lives in here, and your brain lives in here. This is a picture of who you are. And there is conflict from without. And the interesting thing about the conflict from without is very often it's things that you can't control. Can anybody here control the weather? Nope, can't do that. Can anybody here from here control the economy? Nope. Can anybody here control the Eskom right now? Probably not. Probably not. There are so many pressures and problems that come from without, and most of them are outside of your control. And so for Gideon in the story, the thing that was outside him, that was pressurizing him, were the Midianites. He couldn't control them. He had no one-man authority over them that he could do what he wanted to Midianites. He was subject to the problems from without. These were external factors. There was nothing he could really do about them. But our challenge, therefore, if there's nothing we can do about the problems from without, the problems exist within. This is where you live. I live in there. Now, there are a number of problems that exist, and here's the thesis, that the problems that exist within your mind and in your heart are far greater than the problems that exist without. But we will deny them, we'll rationalize them, we'll sweep them under the carpet, we'll pretend that they don't exist. But I reckon that if we could fix the problems within, the problems without would not take nearly as big a preference or priority in our lives. The problem is that we are actually, at the end of the day, our own worst problem. Now let me take you through the story and see if you can identify with Gideon at this particular point. Gideon, first of all, within the internals here, was the victim of poor theology. He had listened to too many sort of sermons of people preaching prosperity and stuff like that, saying that God wants you to be wealthy and healthy and happy all the time. And I don't find that in Scripture. I know there is an element of truth in that, but it's not a total truth. And we all know that a half-truth is worse than a total lie. And so we can get ourselves into the place where we say, like he did, if God is for us, why have all these bad things happened to us? That's what he says to the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord says, God is with you. And he says, I don't think so. Check out the evidence. The Midianites are hoarding us. We've lost our crops. We've lost everything. If God is for us, why have all these bad things happened to us? He's listening and is a victim of very poor theology. He acknowledged, secondly, that he has no strength. He's a little wimp. I have no strength. The angel of the Lord said, go in the power that you have and save the Israelites from Midian. He says, oh Lord, I have no power. How often haven't we, and I say this with kindness, heard the churches say that we don't have any power. The world is overwhelming us. We have no power to stand against it. Of course you do. Of course we do. We have the power. But he was saying, oh no, I'm just a spiritual wimp. I have nothing going for me. And I will just play the victim. And everything is against me. And nobody loves me. And I'm just going to go and eat worms. You know, that's the kind of theology and the philosophy that was going on in this man's life. He had lost his identity. You know, you are who God says you are. You do know that. You are not sometimes who you think you are. Your identity is not found in what you can do or what somebody else says about you or what your teacher said about you when you were at school many years ago. You are not who your peers say you are. You are people who God says you are. And God says you are awesome. God says you are fantastic. You may be a bit messed up, but you are awesome. Start acting awesome. And here's poor old Gideon living this victim's mentality of saying, I'm nobody. I am from the weakest tribe of the weakest clan of the weakest nation of Israel. I could never possibly do anything for God. And then fifthly, we see how he was full of anger. He was full of bitterness. That's why he's hiding in a cave. He's hiding in the cave because anger and bitterness has done that to him. And that's what you do when you get angry and bitter. You find yourself a little cave and you want to roll stones in front of it. You just want to sit there and sulk. That's what he was doing. Anger and bitterness had so crept into his soul. Every time he looked down from the hill, he saw the Midianites. His anger would rise and his bitterness would rise. And he would just go deeper and deeper into his cave where the winepress was. Hey, man, we do exactly the same thing. Anger and bitterness just drives us further and further into the cave. And here's the deal. The problems inside the cave of our minds are far greater than the pressure of the Midianites in his case or the pressures of the world around us. Because you can't fix them. All you can do is fix who you are. You have complete control over them. Come back with me to what I said just now. We spoke about areas of conflict. Now it's very apparent right now that we're fighting a war with the weather up in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, and the war is on. And there's probably about 1,000 people that have lost their lives now as a result of that cyclone that came through around. And the war is on. The weather has declared a war upon us, and we're not doing very well. It has left a trail of devastation behind it. That's only one aspect of the war that we fight in this world. The other aspect of the war that we fight is far more consequential than the weather, and that is the issue of wars. Weather is one war, but wars are another war. When we compare how many people have died up there in Mozambique, and I say there was great compassion and sadness that so many people have lived their lives, do you know how many people have been killed by war in the course of the world? And that's human-related. It's much bigger than the consequences of typhoons and cyclones and huge waves. Much bigger. It's a consequence of our own sinful desire of pride and the desire for more. And we want to greed, and we want this, and we lust after this, we lust after that. And the consequences of our humanity in the way that we live in our depraved way, the consequences are far higher than the weather that exists around us. But it's nothing compared, people, I don't think, to the war that's going on in your head right now. The war that exists in your head. That's why the Apostle Paul says this. Philippians 4 verse 7, you know the verse well. He says, may the peace of God that transcends all understanding, because it comes from Him. It doesn't come from nice circumstances. May the peace of God that transcends all understanding keep your heart and your mind in the knowledge and the love of Jesus Christ. Therein lies the source of your peace. When you know Jesus, when He is number one in your life, you will find peace. It's a crazy thing. That when you find Him to be who He says He is and who the Scriptures say He is, peace will invade your soul and drive everything else out. God's peace doesn't need to be applied as much to your circumstances as it does to your heart and to your mind. That's where peace needs to be found. Let's go to reading number 2. I want to read from chapter 6, verse 25 through to verse 32. Listen as I read. That same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altars to Baal, and cut down the Asherah poles beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, with the Asherah pole lying beside it, cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? When they carefully investigated, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down Baal's altars and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. But Joash replied, you're a very clever man, this man. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal is really a god, he can defend himself. when someone breaks down his altar. So that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him, because he broke down Baal's altar. Here's the deal, people. The problem with the things that we've got going on in our mind, the problem with the anger and the unforgiveness and the pride and the fear and all of these things that control us inside here, the problem with those things is that we make gods of them. You say, how do you mean? We make gods of anger and unforgiveness. Well, listen, you know what a God does to you? A God demands your energy. You've given your energy to the wrong God. A God demands that you serve Him. And every time you, with your pride and your dust and your arrogance and the stuff that's going on inside you do that stuff, you're worshiping the wrong God. And you've put the wrong God upon the altar. And then the next thing that you do with these gods on these altars is you try and defend them. They are the very things that are destroying you and taking away your internal peace of mind. And you create arguments around them. You try and sustain them. You try and protect the very things that should be destroyed in your life. Do you get this? These are the altars. And Gideon went out there and he flattened the altars of his father. He went out there with great power and with great intentionality. And he wiped out the altars. Shouldn't we do the same? Instead of trying to defend these altars and these mini gods with small g's, we should wipe them out. And proportionately to the amount that you wipe out these gods, plundering your mind, the peace of God will move in and fill the place that they have left. That's the deal. Trouble is, we don't want to do that. We don't want to. Do you mean I have to get kind of rough on those things that I've been justifying? Indeed, you do. Here's a beautiful picture. I want to show it to you up here on the screen for a moment. It's a picture that was painted in the early 1900s by a guy by the name of Brian Shaw. And it's a picture of Jesus standing in the temple. He stands alone. And in his presence, he has generals, soldiers, kings. He has all these mighty men in the eyes of the world. And they're all in there. They've stopped fighting. This one probably had a war with this one. And this probably hated that one there. There had been a war that was going on. It's like the picture of the kings and the wars and the generals that you have in your mind that you are using to prop up and to defend the very altars that should be broken down. You say, how do we break the altars down? Very simple. We acknowledge the presence of Jesus in our lives. Now you see Jesus standing here. He doesn't have a submachine gun. He's not going to fight with anybody. His mere presence disarms all of these people. His mere presence standing in the center of your life makes all these other people bow down to him. The kings of the altars that you have raised are putting down their crown before him. The generals who you have used to prop up all the altars to defend the things that are actually destroying you, they are all standing to attention, waiting for him to give an instruction. They are falling apart. They are coming to pieces, all because of the presence of Jesus. And you say, is it that simple? I think it is. When you elevate Jesus to the place that he should be in your life, in your heart, and in your mind, watch what happens to all these other issues over here. Of all these other generals and kings who rule your mind right now, they will fall off their thrones. They will bow the knee to him simply because Jesus is there. You know, we did a sermon series a while back and we entitled it This One Thing. And we said that if you did this one thing, that a whole lot of other things would become either easier to do or you wouldn't have to do them at all if you just did that one thing. Well, here's the one thing. When you elevate Jesus to number one in your life, watch what happens to the rest of the junk. The altars come down. Just that one thing. This is not complicated, people. It's just that one thing. Let's talk about secondly here. Speaking about the problem. Problem is more internal than external. Deal with the problems internally, and you'll be able to handle the problems externally so much better and not fall apart at the same time. Let's talk about here the product. Can't help but notice the change that took place in this man called Gideon. I want to read to you now from chapter 6, verse 36 to verse 40. Let's read there. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew." That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry and all the ground was covered with dew. Now, the product that we find coming out of this broken man is the product of new, I think one word for it, boldness. Can you imagine being so bold as to be able to say to God, "Okay, God, I know you want to do something with me, but do you mind if you could just pass a few tests first?" There's an element of boldness there. But you'll notice it's never arrogance. But he stands before God. He's getting the hint now that God wants him to do something. But he's saying, "Lord, if you really want to do it, would it be okay if I put you to the test? And if I put the fleece out there the first time, it'll wring out with the water, the second time it'll be dry. Would that be okay?" And God is not offended by this, because peace with God has been established. Now the peace of God leads to something that I think all of us need. We need boldness. We need boldness to walk into the presence of God. It's never arrogance. You never walk strutting your stuff into the presence of God. You come humbly, but there's a paradox here of humility and boldness marching together into the presence of God. It's this bold. He stands before God and says, "Lord, is it okay if I test you? Is it okay if I do this?" And God meets him at the point of his test. Let me draw another picture for you. Remember a while back, we did a thing on what we call a matrix. A matrix is just a way to help us to bring different thoughts together. And we spoke about how in human terms we think in linear lines. We think beginning, we think end. We think in opposites. We think law, we think grace. And we see as they are polarized, they look like they're complete opposites because we put them at the end of the lines. If we take each of those concepts and give them their own line, here we have the line that suggests your fear, as opposed to this line, and it's ever increasing. Okay, the arrow is taking you up. God's love. You put those into two different scenarios, two different lines, and then you name the quadrants. On the first quadrant here, you have low in fear, this quadrant here, but high in love. Okay, you getting this? It's low in fear, but high in love. We call this place heaven. No fear in heaven, and lots of love there. Okay? And then you come across to the other side, and you have low in fear and low in love. And what do you call that place? We call it safety. It's just safe. It's boring. It's nebulous. And it's the place where many Christians live. That's the worst for me, is the worst sector of them all. It's close to being dead. Okay. Then you come up here and you see we have high in fear and low in love. And you know what we call this place? We call this place, this is the high field, we call this place hopelessness. Hopeless. There's no love here. There's high fear in this quadrant. And when I'm high in fear and low in love, my mind immediately becomes hopeless in being able to understand the truth thereof. But there is still this quarter here. Here's the interesting one. This is a great sector. This is the sector where we flourish. This is the flourishing sector, because here's the deal. When you draw a 45-degree angle here, and your fears meet with God's love, you will flourish. I love this. You don't look very bright. But when your fears are met with God's love, all of a sudden, that's where faith lives. Because out of God's love, when you live in the context of God's love, and God's love meets with your fear, the two of them will unite to form a great place of faith. People, X marks the spot. Like last week. X marks the spot. When you can bring your fears to a loving God, having established peace with God, and then God meets you, He'll meet you halfway. You do know that. He doesn't just say, oh, I'll overwhelm all your fears. It's okay, you can just call upon my name and you will have peace. That's not true. If that were true, then we would all be doing it. But there is a place, X marks the spot, where your fears and God's love meet, and that is the place where you mark, where you flourish. It's the place that we call the place of faith. Now, this boldness took him to here. Gideon was able to say, okay, Lord, I've tested you now. I've brought my fear to you. I just want to check out that I'm on the right path here. I brought my fear, and God smiles and says, I will meet you halfway. I do not demand that you do everything I say. You're allowed to test me like this. Now, I love this boldness because it's like the most beautiful thing that God meets us like halfway. Have you noticed that? Where God says, I give you a command, and I'm not expecting, because of humanity and because of your fallenness, that you will ever be able to do what I've asked you to do. But if you will meet me halfway, and you will make the effort, and you will meet me there, I will meet you halfway, and we together will make something happen here. Just think for a moment of Peter when he messed up and he denied Jesus, and they met on the shore, on the beach. And Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And the word he uses there is agape. You've heard this before, I'm sure. And the agape there is unconditional love. He's saying to Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me unconditionally? And Peter knows in his honesty at the bottom of his heart that he can't love God that high. So he says, oh, Jesus, I love you, but I don't love you agape. I love you philo, which is the love that exists between friends. It's a lower version of agape love. 3 times Jesus says, Peter, do you agape me? Peter gives the same answer. God, I can't abide. Jesus, I can't agape you, but I can philo you. It's a lower level of love. And then probably with a smile on his face, Jesus says, okay, I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you at the point of where you can love me. I love that because that makes me feel a lot better. We go our part, God comes his part, and faith begins. And faith grows. Now, the interesting thing is for Peter that he did eventually love God agape style. He did eventually love God agape because they took him and they crucified him as well. In the same format they crucified Jesus, the one who he once said he could only fear now, he had grown in his love and his faith. People, look at this. Gideon grew in his boldness. He grew in his faith. And it started at a place where X marks the spot. He brings his fear into the context of God's love, and faith begins to flourish. That's what needs to happen in our minds. And then in chapter 7, my time is going. Let's just wind up as quickly as we can. Chapter 7, from verse 1 to verse 8. Let me rather tell you because it's a long reading. What happened was God says, okay, you have tested me. Now's my time to test you. I want you to go and fight Midian, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to call all the Israelites to yourself, all the fighting men. So he sends the word out to Israel. 32,000 men came with their knob carriers and what spears they had. And he looked at this army and he said, God, against 250,000 Midianites, it doesn't look like we're going to pull this off. Can we all just go home now? And God said, no, 32,000 men is too many. Gideon says, you must be joking. But he doesn't do that. He says, Lord, whatever you want, you have passed your test, God, and now I'll do whatever you tell me to do. His faith is beginning so beautifully to grow. And God, you've got too many men. I want you to take them down and tell those who want to go home that they can go. If they don't want to fight, they can go home. 22,000 men went home, leaving him with 10,000 men. The test is getting bigger. He says, Lord, this is quite exciting. I've got 10,000 people. It's less than I had, but I know you can probably do something with them. God said, you still got too many men. I want you to take them down to the water's edge and watch them drink And those that lift their water to their mouths like this while they're watching, put them on one side. 9,700 of those people stuck their heads in the water, and he kicked them to the side, leaving him with 300 men. You can see his faith growing. His own boldness is beginning to grow here. He says, Lord, I only have 300 men. What am I going to do now? It's like so exciting. We make it look like he's so excited about this thing. Lord, even if there's just me, I know with your help, because we've met halfway, that my faith in the context of your love, we can win this thing. So God says to him, okay, take those 300 guys, give them each a firebrand and a pot, and go and make them stand in 3 groups of 100 in each group around the enemy. And when I give you the signal, tell them to break their pots and shout for God and for Gideon. And you know what happens at the end? Because of the product that is now full of faith, God gets the... Anyone want to get us? The prize. You see, God gets the prize because Gideon has done what he needs to do. That's the chief end of man, you do know, is that we would enjoy God, glorify him forever. And when you do that, all fear goes. When you do that, and Jesus is number one, all the altars come down. God is number one. Every general that you've put in charge of guarding your little altars of pain and suffering and victim's mentality and anger, and they all bow the knee to Jesus. Jesus is number one. You're then privileged to be able to say, God, let me put you to the test, but not a foolish test. Because we know that's what Jesus said on the Mount of Temptation. Where Satan said, hey, Jesus, you haven't eaten for 40 days. I've been counting, 40 days now. You haven't eaten anything. You must be kind of hungry. Why don't you turn these rocks into bread? And Jesus says, do not put the Lord your God to a foolish test. Don't do that. But the beauty is, with boldness, we can stand before God when our faith in him meets and flourishes at the point of us bringing our failure and our fear to meet with his grace and his love. That's when we begin to have the peace of God, and the prize of God's glory shines out through your life. Isn't that what you all want? Every one of us will look different in that arena, but isn't that what everybody wants? So I leave that with you today. Are you fighting a battle? Are you fighting the battle of fear in your mind? Are you at conflict with the world around you? Well, the conflict in the world around you is going to continue. I have to tell you that. There are times that God uniquely does protect us, and that's that. But the general rule is we have to go through it. Jesus went through it, so too will we. But the conflict in your mind, that's where the greatest war happens. And I hope today, maybe today, just maybe today, you will say to God, some of those altars need to come down. As I put you, number one, you don't have to fight with all the generals in there. Because when Jesus is there, he disarms them all. All you have to do is that one thing and put Jesus first, foremost, his purpose and his place in your life, and watch what happens. You say, is it that simple? Well, according to the story of Gideon, apparently it is. And I hope you find that to be your experience. As it's become, strangely, our custom over these past few sermons, this was not intended, but it happened kind of by accident. I began writing letters from God to you and to me. So I have another one. And I want you just to sit, close your eyes if you will, and relax as I read what I believe. And this is merely my thoughts in this. I hope that God has given me the right thoughts as to what he would say to you about him being Jehovah Shalom, your peace. Let me read this to you. Just relax and listen. My dear child, wow, you live in a messed up world. I lived there once too. I understand how tough it is to try and make sense of some of the things that happen to you. I don't blame you for questioning so many of the things you've been told about me. I'm aware of the poor theology that you have heard that promises health and happiness all the time. All this has done has increased your level of disappointment. I realize too that the enemy from without is ominous and looks terribly threatening. This is normal. My sadness, however, comes when I see that your heart and your mind, and I see that the war that rages within you far supersedes the war that rages around you. I am so saddened by the fact that so many of you live within the cave of your own anger and bitterness. This, I know, drains you of all life and love. I want you to know today that I'm on your side and want the very best for you. My peace can be your portion. I am Jehovah Shalom, and I have signed a forever peace treaty with you using the very blood of my Son Jesus. All that is awaiting is for you to sign as well. The war between us over the issues of sin has been dealt with, and the price has been paid. As to the war that rages in your mind, now that's a different story. For my peace to fill your heart and mind, I need to rule. Because a kingdom divided against itself will surely fall. All the idols you have created must go. I need to be your number one passion and number one purpose. There is no idol that can possibly stand in my presence. You need to reject their power over you. When the idols of pride, lust, self-centeredness, bitterness, unforgiveness go, then you will see that my peace will be given in proportion to their removal. The fear that once was all you knew will leave and be replaced by the spirit of boldness. Feel free to test me in this regard and see if I won't meet you where you are. You will battle to come to my level, but I have absolutely no problem in coming down to yours. Peace can only thrive in the atmosphere of faith, and faith can only be released in the context of my love. The only legitimate fear out there is the fear of me. The fact is that when you fear me, you need fear nothing else and nobody else. Please hold me, therefore, in the place of deep reverence, remembering that I am God. Join me in my hatred of sin, remembering that when sin comes between us, peace will depart, leaving only a guilty conscience. Bring to me your fears, and with my help, your fears will turn into faith. The love I have for you and my acknowledged presence in your life will cause you to flourish again, despite the presence of pressures that will still come upon you from without. I still have so many things I would like for you to do. Do not fret about this. Just trust me. My deep love for you will cast out every fear. My deep love for you will cast out every fear. And you will be a blessing to me and so many others. My glory is at stake. My name is Jehovah Shalom, and I am your peace. Father, thank you that we can find peace in you. And for those of troubled spirits today amongst us, I pray that what we have spoken about you today would not just be an academic assent to some religious facts, but would be their experience. We ask it in your name. Amen.